One criminal organization became so powerful that its leader was making $420 million per week. That's more revenue than most Fortune 500 companies generate in a year. He built private prisons. He burned $2 million in cash in a single night just to keep his daughter warm. And when the government tried to stop him, he blew up a commercial airliner, killing 107 people. But he's not the most dangerous entry on this list. One drug lord escaped a maximum security prison through a mile-long tunnel with a motorcycle on rails. They caught him. He's serving life in America's most secure prison. His cartel didn't even slow down. And the organization at the end of this video has existed for over 300 years. It's survived wars, revolutions, and every law enforcement agency on Earth. And it's more powerful today than ever. 7 criminal organizations exposed from the inside, from street gangs to global empires worth billions. Let's get into it.
Most criminal organizations take decades to build power. MS-13 went from a handful of Salvadoran teenagers in Los Angeles to one of the most feared gangs on Earth in less than 20 years. And the worst part? The United States government accidentally helped create them. In the 1980s, El Salvador was torn apart by a brutal civil war. Thousands of Salvadoran families fled to Los Angeles seeking safety. Their kids ended up in neighborhoods already controlled by established Mexican-American gangs. These Salvadoran teenagers were targeted, beaten, and robbed constantly. So they formed their own gang for protection, Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13. But here's where a well-intentioned policy created a monster. In the 1990s, the U.S. began deporting undocumented gang members back to El Salvador. The problem was, these kids had grown up in L.A. They'd learned gang structure and violence from some of the most established gangs in America. Now they were being dropped into a post-war country with no functioning law enforcement. They didn't just survive in El Salvador, they took over. MS-13 spread through Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. Then members crossed back into the United States, creating a transnational loop that law enforcement still can't fully break. Their reputation for violence is extreme even by gang standards. Initiation rituals involve being beaten by multiple members simultaneously. Leaving the gang is punishable by death. Rivals and informants have been killed with machetes, a method chosen specifically for its psychological impact. Think about that for a second. In an era of automatic weapons, they deliberately choose machetes, not because they're more effective, because they're more terrifying. The FBI estimates MS-13 has over 10,000 members in the United States alone and over 70,000 worldwide. They operate in 46 states. The U.S. government has designated them a transnational criminal organization. Multiple federal task forces are dedicated solely to dismantling them. And yet, they keep growing. MS-13 is proof that criminal organizations don't need money or sophistication to become dangerous. They just need desperation, loyalty, and a willingness to commit violence that makes even other criminals afraid. But MS-13 operates on brutality alone. The next organization on this list combined that brutality with something far more dangerous: billions of dollars and a government that couldn't stop them.
Pablo Escobar didn't just break the law, he went to war with the entire nation of Colombia, and for a while he was winning. The Medellín cartel was founded in the late 1970s by Escobar and several partners in Medellín, Colombia. Their business was cocaine, and they scaled it like a Fortune 500 company. At its peak, the Medellín cartel supplied an estimated 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. 80%. One organization controlling the supply of an entire drug to the world's largest market. Escobar's personal net worth reached an estimated $30 billion. Forbes listed him as the 7th richest person on the planet. He was making so much cash that he spent $2,500 per month just on rubber bands to hold the money together. Rats ate approximately 10% of his stored cash annually because there was simply too much to protect. He built hospitals, schools, soccer fields, housing for the poor.
In the slums of Medellín, he was beloved. They called him Robin Hood. But the other side of Escobar was pure terror. When the Colombian government moved to extradite drug traffickers to the United States, Escobar declared war, literally. His campaign was called Plata o Plomo, silver or lead, take the bribe or take the bullet. He orchestrated the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing 107 people on board. He bombed the DAS building, Colombia's equivalent of the FBI, killing 63 people. He ordered the assassination of presidential candidates, judges, police officers, and journalists. An entire nation was held hostage by one man and his organization. Here's the detail that shows how deep the corruption went. Escobar was actually elected to the Colombian Congress in 1982, a drug lord sitting in the national legislature, making laws, voting on policy, while simultaneously flooding the world with cocaine. He eventually surrendered to authorities, but only on his terms. He was housed in a custom-built prison called La Catedral that he designed himself. It had a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and a waterfall. He continued running his empire from inside. When the government tried to move him to an actual prison, he simply walked out. Escobar was killed by Colombian security forces on December 2, 1993, one day after his 44th birthday, shot on a rooftop in Medellín while trying to flee. The cartel collapsed without him, but the infrastructure he built didn't disappear, it evolved. Other organizations filled the vacuum. The cocaine trade continued. The violence continued. Escobar proved that one person with enough money and enough willingness to use violence could hold an entire country hostage. But what happens when that same model operates not for decades, but for centuries? And what if the organization is so embedded in a society that destroying it would collapse the economy? That's the Yakuza, and their story is unlike anything else on this list.
In most countries, criminal organizations hide. They operate in shadows. They avoid attention. The Yakuza print business cards. For most of their modern history, Japan's largest criminal organization operated openly. They had offices with signs on the door. They had logos. They had corporate structures with clearly defined hierarchies. Members wore their affiliation literally on their skin through elaborate full-body tattoos that could take years to complete. And the Japanese government largely tolerated them. The Yakuza's origins trace back to the 1600s, emerging from two groups, Tequila, who were street peddlers, and Bakuto, who were gamblers. By the 20th century, they'd evolved into one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in human history. At their peak in the 1960s, the Yakuza had an estimated 184,000 members. To put that in perspective, that's larger than many countries' standing armies. The largest faction, the Yamaguchi-gumi, generated estimated annual revenue of $6.6 billion. That's billion with a B, from gambling, protection rackets, real estate, construction, finance, entertainment, and trafficking. But here's what makes the Yakuza genuinely different from every other organization on this list. They had rules, a strict code called jingi that governed behavior. Members who violated the code faced punishment, including yubitsume, the ritual cutting off of a finger joint as atonement. Thousands of Yakuza members are missing finger joints. Walk through certain neighborhoods in Tokyo or Osaka, and you'll see men with conspicuously bandaged or shortened fingers. After the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, the Yakuza were among the first organizations to deliver aid to affected areas, before the government, before the Red Cross. The Yamaguchi-gumi dispatched trucks of supplies within hours, a criminal organization providing disaster relief faster than the government. That's how embedded they were in Japanese society. But make no mistake, the humanitarian gestures were strategic. The violence was real. Yakuza wars between rival factions have involved shootings, stabbings, and car bombs. They control significant portions of Japan's entertainment industry. Human trafficking operations run through their networks. Recent Japanese laws have severely restricted Yakuza operations. Membership has dropped below 30,000.
Banks won't serve them, landlords won't rent to them, their children can be denied school enrollment. They're declining, but 400 years of embedded criminal infrastructure doesn't disappear night and day. The Yakuza operated in plain sight because Japanese society had a complicated relationship with organized crime. But in Russia, that relationship went even further. After the Soviet Union collapsed, an entire nation was essentially handed to the mob, and what they built in the chaos makes the Yakuza look like a neighborhood watch.
When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it created a power vacuum so massive that organized crime didn't just fill it, they became the system. Within a decade, former Soviet criminals controlled banks, oil companies, media empires, and political offices across Russia and Eastern Europe. The line between organized crime and legitimate government essentially disappeared. The Russian Bratva didn't start in 1991. Its roots go back to the Soviet prison system, where a criminal caste called Vori in Zakon, or thieves in law, developed their own code, hierarchy, and governance structure. These men ran the prisons from inside. When the Soviet Union fell, millions of people were suddenly living in a country with no functioning economic system. State assets worth billions were being privatized, and the only people with the networks, the cash, and the willingness to use violence to seize those assets were the criminals. This period produced the Russian oligarchs. Some were legitimate businessmen, many had direct connections to organized crime. The distinction between the two was often meaningless. The Solntsevskaya Bratva became one of the most powerful criminal organizations on Earth. Estimated at over 9,000 members, operating across more than 50 countries. Revenue estimated in the billions annually from arms trafficking, drug smuggling, cybercrime, money laundering, and extortion. Here's what separates Russian organized crime from everything else on this list. They didn't corrupt the government, they became the government. Former intelligence officers from the KGB moved seamlessly between state security and criminal enterprise. The skills were identical: surveillance, intimidation, asset seizure. The only difference was who signed the paycheck. Russian organized crime pioneered cybercrime on a global scale. Ransomware attacks that shut down hospitals, hacking operations that targeted banks across Europe and North America, digital theft that generated hundreds of millions in untraceable cryptocurrency. They've been connected to assassinations on foreign soil using methods designed to send a message, poisonings in London, shootings across Europe, critics, journalists, and defectors targeted with a boldness that most criminal organizations would never risk. Interpol, the FBI, and European law enforcement agencies have spent decades trying to dismantle Russian criminal networks. The networks adapt, restructure, and continue. The Russian Bratva proved that in the absence of strong institutions, organized crime doesn't just thrive, it becomes the institution. But Russia's chaos lasted decades. The next organization on this list has operated over a century with the level of discipline and strategic patience that makes every other criminal enterprise look impulsive.
There's a word that most people use without knowing what it actually means: mafia. It's not a generic term for organized crime. It's a specific organization, born in Sicily, exported to America, and responsible for one of the most sophisticated systems of power and corruption ever created. The Sicilian Mafia, or Cosa Nostra, emerged in the 19th century from the lemon groves and sulfur mines of rural Sicily. Landowners hired armed guards to protect their property. Those guards eventually realized they had more power than the people paying them. They became the power. Cosa Nostra's genius was never about violence alone. It was about the system. They created a parallel government. In villages across Sicily, the mafia settled disputes, enforced contracts, provided protection, and punished those who stepped out of line. They did what the actual government either couldn't or wouldn't do. People didn't go to the police, they went to the Don. When Sicilians emigrated to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Cosa Nostra went with them. The American Mafia built empires in New York, Chicago, Las Vegas, and dozens of other cities. Prohibition turned them into billionaires. They infiltrated labor unions, controlled construction, dominated garbage collection and corrupted police departments from the street level to the commissioner's office. At their American peak, the five families of New York controlled an estimated $50 billion in combined annual revenue. But back in Sicily, the Sicilian Mafia reached levels of power that the American branch never matched. In 1992, the Sicilian Mafia committed two acts that shocked the world. They assassinated Judge Giovanni Falcone by detonating a half-ton of explosives beneath a highway. The blast left a crater so large it looked like a missile strike. His wife and 3 bodyguards were also killed. 2 months later, they killed Judge Paolo Borsellino with a car bomb outside his mother's apartment. He and 5 bodyguards died. These 2 judges had spent their careers building cases against Cosa Nostra. The Maxi trial of 1986 to 1987 resulted in hundreds of convictions. The Mafia's response was to murder the judges who made it possible. The assassinations backfired catastrophically. The Italian public was outraged. The government launched its most aggressive anti-mafia campaign in history. Hundreds of members were arrested. The code of silence, omertà, began to crack as members turned informant to save themselves. Salvatore Totoriena, the boss of bosses who ordered both assassinations, was captured in 1993 after 20 years as a fugitive. He died in prison in 2017. The Sicilian Mafia still exists, but the assassinations of Falcone and Borsellino marked the beginning of their decline. They overplayed their hand. They confused power with invincibility.
The Sicilian Mafia proved that even the most powerful organizations can overplay their hand. But what if you build an empire so well engineered that it doesn't need you anymore? What if you design the infrastructure so perfectly that your own arrest changes absolutely nothing? One man figured that out, and even though he's sitting in the most secure prison on Earth right now, his empire is still running like he never left.
In 2015, the most wanted drug lord on Earth escaped from a maximum security Mexican prison through a tunnel. Not a rough hole in the ground, a fully engineered tunnel, 1 mile long, with a motorcycle on rails, ventilation, lighting, and reinforced walls, built directly into the shower floor of his cell. Joaquin El Chapo didn't just escape prison, he engineered his way out like he was building a subway line. And this was his second escape. The Sinaloa cartel makes the Medellín cartel look like a startup. Where Escobar ruled through terror and spectacle, the Sinaloa cartel built something more dangerous, a logistics empire. Think of them as the Amazon of drug trafficking. They didn't just produce drugs, they built the most sophisticated distribution network the world has ever seen. Tunnels under the US-Mexico border, some with rail systems, some with elevators, some with air conditioning, submarines, semi-submersible vessels that cross the Pacific, catapults that literally launch drugs over border walls, drones, hidden compartments in commercial trucks engineered to fool X-ray machines. For every method law enforcement shut down, the Sinaloa cartel invented 3 more. That adaptability is what made them more dangerous than Escobar ever was. El Chapo built the cartel from the mountains of Sinaloa State in northwestern Mexico into a global operation spanning over 50 countries. The DEA estimates the cartel generated between $3 billion and $39 billion annually. The range is that wide because nobody actually knows the real number. He was first captured in 1993, escaped in 2001 by hiding in a laundry cart, recaptured in 2014, escaped through the tunnel in 2015, recaptured again in 2016 after a dramatic raid involving Mexican Marines and a high-speed chase through Sinaloa's storm drains. He was extradited to the United States in 2017, tried in a Brooklyn federal courthouse under security so extreme that the bridge connecting Brooklyn to Manhattan was closed during his transport, convicted on all counts, sentenced to life plus 30 years, currently held in ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America. And here's the detail that makes the Sinaloa cartel the most dangerous entry on this list so far. El Chapo is in prison. The cartel didn't even slow down. His sons and former partners divided operations and continued. The drugs kept flowing.
The tunnels kept getting built, the violence continued. You can capture the leader, you can't capture the infrastructure. The Sinaloa cartel proved what the Medellín cartel couldn't. If you build the system right, the system survives without you. Escobar's empire collapsed when he died. El Chapo's empire kept running the moment he was arrested. But even the Sinaloa cartel, with all its tunnels and submarines and billions, is essentially a modern operation, decades old at most. The final organization on this list has been operating for over 3 centuries. It has survived dynastic wars, colonial invasions, communist revolutions, and every law enforcement agency in Asia trying to destroy it, and it's still growing. Every organization on this list eventually peaked and declined. The Medellín cartel collapsed, the Yakuza shrank, the Sicilian Mafia was broken by its own arrogance. The Chinese Triads have been operating for over 300 years, and they haven't declined. They've evolved. Their origin story sounds like mythology, but it's rooted in documented history. In the 17th century, secret societies formed in southern China to resist the Qing dynasty, which had overthrown the Ming dynasty. These resistance groups used secret rituals, blood oaths, and coded communication to avoid detection. When the political cause faded, the organizational structure remained, and it turned to crime. By the 19th century, Triad societies controlled opium distribution across Southeast Asia. When the British Empire fought the Opium Wars to force China to accept opium imports, the Triads were the domestic distribution network, an empire's drug trade running through a criminal organization that had existed for 200 years already. Today, the major Triad groups include Sun Yi'an, with an estimated 50,000 members, 14K with approximately 20,000 members, and Wo Xing Wo with roughly 20,000 members. Their combined operations span drug trafficking, human smuggling, counterfeiting, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and cybercrime across Asia, Europe, Australia, and North America. Here's what makes the Triads the most dangerous organization on this list: adaptability. The Medellín cartel clung to tradition and it weakened them. The Yakuza's visible presence made them vulnerable to new laws. The Russian Bratva's ties to the state made them dependent on political stability. The Triads adapt to anything. When Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, experts predicted the Triads would be crushed by Beijing's authoritarian government. Instead, they shifted operations. They moved into mainland China's booming economy. They invested in legitimate businesses. They embedded themselves in real estate development, entertainment, and technology. When cryptocurrency emerged, the Triads were among the first criminal organizations to use it for large-scale money laundering. When online gambling became a billion-dollar industry, they moved into it immediately. Their human smuggling networks are among the most extensive on Earth. People from China and Southeast Asia are moved across borders through Triad-connected networks, paying enormous fees and often ending up in forced labor or trafficking situations. Law enforcement agencies across a dozen countries have dedicated units focused on Triad activity. Interpol maintains ongoing investigations. The FBI, Australian Federal Police, and Hong Kong Police Force coordinate operations constantly. The Triads survive because they understand something that most criminal organizations don't. The greatest threat to organized crime isn't law enforcement, it's rigidity. The organizations that refuse to change get destroyed. The ones that evolve faster than the government's trying to stop them persist. 300 years, multiple continents, hundreds of thousands of members across dozens of affiliated groups, and still growing. That's not a criminal organization, that's an institution.
7 organizations, hundreds of years of combined history, trillions of dollars in combined revenue, and millions of lives destroyed.
MS-13 proved that desperation creates monsters. Escobar proved that money can hold a country hostage. The Yakuza proved that crime can hide in plain sight. The Russian Bratva proved that when governments fail, criminals fill the void. The Sicilian Mafia proved that even the most powerful organizations can overplay their hand. And the Triads proved that the organizations which adapt are the ones that survive. Every one of them started the same way. A group of people who felt the legitimate system had failed them, who decided they would build their own system, and who discovered that once you build a system on violence, the violence never stops. If this changed how you see organized crime, subscribe. We investigate the crimes, empires, and dark histories that shaped the world. I'll see you in the next one.